Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I get paid to hitchhike. Paid hitchhiker. $150 per hour. 2-hour nights. Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. I did the math in my head. About $6,500 a month. Not bad. As that thought sank in, I realized studying music theory had probably been a mistake. Still, I decided to reply to the listing. I answered a few questions, attached my resume, though I wasn't sure what good that would do, and hit send. Almost instantly, I got a response. I'd half expected that. I couldn't imagine many people jumping at this position. Thank you for your interest in the hitchhiking position. We're excited to invite you to move forward with the interview process, and we look forward to getting to know you professionally. I typed back quickly. Thanks for reaching out. I'd be glad to move forward with the interview. What dates and times work best for you? The reply came moments later. Friday, followed by a set of coordinates. I plugged them into Google Maps. The destination was a small building on a long road in the middle of a forest. On Street View, the place looked distorted, almost blurred. All I could make out was a sign. No soliciting. No religion. No unscheduled meetings. It was Wednesday then. I tried to convince myself I didn't need the money, that it wasn't worth the risk. But the truth was, I did need the money. Badly. I was drowning in debt, and every last dollar would help. By Friday night, I was in my beat-up car, headed toward the coordinates. When I arrived, I saw the rest of the building the street view had obscured. It was larger than I'd imagined. 2 stories in the basement, the latter revealed by the rows of windows sunk into foundation. The whole place was gray concrete, punctuated by thin sheet metal doors. I tried the front door. Locked. Knocked. No answer. So I sat on a wooden bench about 15 feet from the entrance and waited. It was 7:30, the forest nearly pitch black, when 2 pairs of headlights appeared on the driveway. From one car stepped a tall man with thinning black hair. From the other, a scrawny kid, maybe 19 at most. The tall one approached first. "Hello, my name is Jeffrey." "Devin," I replied. "This is your partner, James." "Partner?" I asked. I glanced at James. He was gripping his right bicep tightly with his left hand. When he noticed me looking, he released it, raised a hesitant hand in greeting. I waved back with an awkward smile. "Yes," Jeffrey said evenly. "Your partner." After a long silence, he added, "Shall we head inside?" I nodded, and we followed him in. The interior was exactly what I'd pictured. Bare concrete walls, dim light, and a single desk in the middle of the room. Jeffrey took a seat, and James and I sat opposite him. "Can I ask you both a question?" Jeffrey said, pen poised above a sheet of paper. We nodded. "What was the most scared you've ever been?" I hesitated, hoping James would answer first. He didn't. "My house was broken into when I was 16, I said, giving a small, nervous laugh at the end. Jeffrey scribbled something down. Then he turned to James. "I don't know," James muttered. Jeffrey studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Shall we get you both suited up?" We exchanged a glance and answered, "Sure." He led us to a small room with a closet and 2 changing booths, handed me a bag of ragged, tattered clothing. He gestured for me to change. Inside the booth, I slipped into clothes. They looked filthy but smelled surprisingly clean. When I stepped out, I saw James. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, spotless and elegant. We stared at each other in confusion. Jeffrey just grinned, wide and satisfied. "Perfect," he said. "Devin, follow me please. We'll need to touch up your look a bit more." He guided me toward another door, leading down to the basement. At the center of the room stood a red vanity table, stocked with makeup. "Sit." Jeffrey instructed. I sat, staring at myself in the mirror. I wonder how on earth I'd ended up here. Jeffrey went to work with brushes and sponges, moving with the ease of experience. When he finished, my reflection looked ragged, my face dirted, hair greasy, eyes sunken. We went back upstairs. Your turn, Jeffrey said to James. James descended into the basement. As I waited, when he reappeared, his transformation was startling. His hair was neatly combed, his skin glowing, his eyes an unnatural bright blue. Contacts, I guessed. Jeffrey clasped his hands together. Now, a few rules before you head out. He recited them one by one. Never enter the black truck, even if it seems like your last hope. If you ever see a man identical to yourself, get into the car, nod to him, and exit immediately. If the radio is set to 99.3, get out of the car, no matter how fast it's moving. Never allow your driver to pick up another hitchhiker. Everything clear? We both nodded. Wonderful. Please follow me. He led us to his car, opening the front passenger seat and one of the back doors. James hesitated, so I took the front. We'll head to your site first, James, Jeffrey said. Okay, James murmured. We drove through darkness and silence until a bench appeared by the roadside, identical to the one I'd waited on earlier. Your stop, Jeffrey said. James stepped out, sat on the bench, and stuck out his thumb. Onwards to your site, Jeffrey told me as we drove. I finally asked what had been nagging at me. Why did James get the nice makeover? Wouldn't I be better suited to play the businessman? I mean, the kid's a twig. Jeffrey ignored me at first, eyes fixed on the road. Then he smiled, put the car in park, and leaned over me to pop open my door. Remember to tell them to bring you right back to the building, he said. You didn't tell James that. I pointed out. Don't worry, Jeffrey replied. He knows. I figured he'd gone over more rules with James during his makeover. I stepped out and sat on the bench. About 30 minutes passed before I saw headlights. I stuck my thumb out, but the car flew past, not even slowing. 10 minutes later, the woods behind me stirred. At first, just rustling, then twigs snapping, something pacing, circling, the sound of deliberate movement. Closer each time I ignored it, and then the black truck arrived. It didn't appear down the road like a normal vehicle. It was there, headlights already blazing, horn already screaming. The air itself seemed to vibrate from the sound. The beams of light blinded me, catching every raindrop, every speck of dust in their glare. I shielded my face as the truck crept toward me. The horn blared again, long, metallic, almost animal in howling pitch. Get the hell in, a voice shrieked from inside. Not one voice, but dozens layered over each other, all mismatched in tone but perfectly in unison, through the windshield. Shadows moved violently, like a crowd crammed into a space meant for one driver. Faces slammed against the glass, mouths wide, eyes wide, distorted. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were tied down, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I stayed rooted. The truck edged closer, engine rumbling, horn stabbing to the night again and again. Get in, get in, get in. The forest behind me fell silent, as if whatever had been lurking stepped back to give the truck room. I sat perfectly still, fingers digging into the bench. I don't know how long it lasted. Time felt suspended, the horn pressing into my skull like a migraine. Finally, the headlights clicked off. The voices stopped. The truck was gone. No sound of an engine retreating. Just gone. I was alone again. Another 20 minutes passed before I saw the next car. It crawled along the road at an unnatural pace, 15 miles per hour at most. No sound of an engine, just tires crunching gravel. When it reached me, the driver's window rolled down, and I saw myself. Not just a resemblance, me, identical down to the tattered clothes, the smeared makeup, even the way I hunched forward on bad posture. His eyes locked on mine. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just waited. The silence was unbearable. I walked toward the car. My stomach flipped, but I couldn't stop. I opened the passenger door, stepped in and sat. We didn't speak. He didn't look at me again. He simply tapped the wheel twice with one hand, like a signal. I nodded back, throat tight. The moment I closed the door, he pressed the gas, the car jolting forward with impossible speed. But after no more than 100 feet, he braked, and I knew. Get out. I opened the door, stepped into the night, and the car was already gone. No taillights, no trace, just emptiness where it had been. I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath the whole time. Finally, a normal car appeared. The driver leaned out. Where to? Just up the road. I said quickly, desperate to leave. For a moment I panicked. I hadn't checked the radio. My head snapped toward it. 112.7. Safe. Relief washed over me like air after drowning. On the way back, the driver squinted at the roadside. Jesus, what happened to that guy? He muttered. I followed his gaze and my heart collapsed. James. He was sprawled out in the gravel, one arm twitching weakly, blood spreading in a dark halo beneath him. His white shirt, once perfect, was soaked red. His face was pale, slack, but his eyes were still open, still alive. Stop the car. I yelled. The driver slowed, uneasy. I don't know, man. Stop. I threw the door open before the car even halted, stumbling onto the shoulder and running to him. James, it's me. He turned his head with visible effort, his lips trembling like he was trying to form words. A wet cough sprayed crimson down his chin. His hand shook as it reached toward me. I gripped it tight, but his grip was ice cold, already fading. He coughed, body shuddering. Don't let them. His eyes darted toward the trees, as if something was watching us. Then back to me, wide and terrified. Promise me. I promise, I said, though I had no idea what he meant. His chest rose once more, then faltered. His body went slack. Nothing, just a trickle of blood running downhill, soaking into the gravel. Behind me, the driver called out nervously, Hey, man, we should go. Seriously, we should go. I pressed James' hand to my chest one last time before laying it down. My own hands were trembling so badly I could barely stand. Tears blurred my vision as I staggered back to the car. I didn't speak for the rest of the ride. When Jeffrey greeted me back at the building with his usual cheer, I could barely contain myself. Did you see James? He asked lightly. He's dead. I snapped, voice cracking. Jeffrey only tilted his head, almost like he was amused. Oh, what a shame. Don't stay the night. That's it? That's all you have to say? I told you not to worry about your partners, Devin. It does no good. I wanted to scream at him, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I turned and left. The drive back home was silent. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, James' last words echoing in my head. The forest road stretched endlessly, a tunnel of black trees pressing in on both sides. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the shoulder, illuminated in my headlights. He was filthy, long, tangled beard, patchy buzz scalp, and clothes that looked like they'd been torn to shreds weeks ago. He was already standing with his thumb out, arms stiff like it had been raised for hours. I slowed instinctively. Something about him made my stomach twist. His eyes glinted in the light, too sharp, too deliberate. I pressed on the gas, deciding to pass him. The moment I did, his head snapped toward me. His eyes followed my car perfectly, his body jerking into motion. He ran. I glanced in the mirror and nearly swerved. The man was sprinting after me, barefoot, stumbling, but impossibly fast. His mouth hung open, teeth bared, and his voice carried through the trees. Coward! He bellowed, the word ragged, broken by wheezes. I floored it, but his voice didn't fade. Coward, you'll end like the rest. I couldn't stop shaking. My speedometer climbed. But still, his figure clung to the road in my mirror longer than it should have. Too long. Until finally, after what felt like a mile, he was gone. The forest swallowed him. But his voice lingered in my ears like static. Coward, coward, and like the rest. By the time I got home, my hand still hadn't stopped trembling. I went to bed without changing, face pressing to pillow, heart pounding. 2 months passed. Jeffrey replaced James again and again, but none lasted longer than a week. Some came back bruised and broken. Others simply didn't come back at all. Jeffrey never flinched. He only smiled, adjusted his notes, and prepared another partner, and I kept returning. Night after night, each ride gnawed away at me. The rules ran laps in my head even when I was home, as if the job followed me there. Tomorrow night, I've decided I'm going to talk to Jeffrey about quitting. I've already rehearsed how I'll say it. Firm, polite, like it's just a simple resignation. I hope he understands. Story 2. I drive a tow truck on the night shift. Last week I got a call that made me fear the woods. I've been driving tow truck for Morrison's Auto Recovery for 8 years now. Started on day shifts, but the night work pays better and there's less traffic to deal with. You get used to the weird hours, the drunk drivers who wrap their cars around telephone poles, the breakdowns on dark stretches of highway where cell service cuts out. It's honest work and I'm good at it. Most calls are routine. Dead battery, flat tire, fender bender where nobody got hurt. Once in a while you get something that sticks with you, like the time I pulled a sedan out of Miller's Creek with the driver still inside, or the guy who insisted his car had been moved while he was getting coffee at the truck stop. You learn to take people's stories with a grain of salt. Stress and fear make folks see things that aren't there. But last Tuesday's call was different. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened out there on Route 47. The dispatch came in around 2:30 a.m. Vehicle off the road, mile marker 22, possibly occupied. Linda's voice crackled through the radio. Caller said the driver might still be inside, but she couldn't get close enough to check. Mile marker 22 on Route 47 runs through some of the thickest forest in the county. It's a winding two-lane that connects the valley towns to the interstate, popular with truckers trying to avoid the way stations. During the day it's scenic enough, but at night it's just 20 miles of dark trees and no cell coverage. I grabbed my coffee and headed out. Linda had given me the coordinates, so I knew roughly where to look. But finding a car that's actually off the road can mean anything from pulled onto the shoulder to wrapped around a tree 50 yards into the woods. I kept my speed reasonable and watched for reflectors or broken glass. I found it about a quarter mile past a marker. At first glance, it looked like the driver had just pulled off to take a call or get some sleep. The car, a blue Honda Accord, maybe 5 years old, was parked about 30 feet into the tree line on a patch of relatively flat ground. The engine was off, but the headlights were still on, casting weak beams through the fog that had rolled in during the drive. I pulled my truck up parallel to the road and hit the flashers. Standard procedure is to assess the situation before you start hooking anything up, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked over to see what I was dealing with. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. The car's doors were all locked, windows rolled up tight, and I could see someone in the driver's seat, a young woman, maybe mid-20s, gripping the steering wheel like her life depended on it. When my flashlight beam hit the windshield, she looked up at me with eyes that were wide with terror, makeup running. I tapped on the driver's side window. "Ma'am, I'm with Morrison's Towing. Are you hurt?" She shook her head but didn't roll down the window. Instead, she pointed toward the woods behind her car and mouthed something I couldn't make out. "Ma'am, I need you to open the window so we can talk," I called, raising my voice slightly. This time she did roll it down, but just a crack. "You need to get that car out of here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now, don't unhook anything. Don't get out again. Just pull it back to the road." "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm not hurt." She glanced toward the trees again. "But there's something out there. Something big. It's been watching me for the past 2 hours." I'll admit, my first thought was drugs or alcohol. Wouldn't be the first time someone got spooked by shadows while under the influence. But she didn't smell like booze, and her speech was clear and coherent. "What kind of something?" I asked, playing along. "I don't know. I never got a good look at it. But it's huge, bigger than a person. And it's been circling the car, just staying back in the trees where I can't see it clearly." I played my flashlight beam into the woods behind her car. The fog made it hard to see more than 20 feet. But I didn't spot anything unusual, just pine trees and underbrush Same as the rest of the forest along Route 47. Ma'am, I don't see anything back there. How about we get your car back on the road, and I'll follow you to the nearest gas station. You can call someone from there. No, her voice was firm. Don't go back there. Just hook up the car and pull it out. Please. Something in her tone made me pause. I've dealt with a lot of scared drivers over the years, and you learn to distinguish between different kinds of fear. Drunk fear is sloppy and unfocused. Accident fear is sharp, but fades once the immediate danger passes. This was something else. The kind of steady, controlled terror that comes from extended exposure to real danger. I decided to humor her. All right, ma'am. I'm going to hook up the car from here and pull you back to the road. Keep your doors locked and stay inside. Walking back to my truck, I found myself listening more carefully to the sounds around me. The forest was quiet, unusually quiet. No owl calls, no rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Just a low on my truck's engine, and the distant sound of a semi passing on the interstate miles away. I was back in my truck into position when I noticed the smell. It was strong and musky, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. The kind of smell that makes you breathe through your mouth. I'd encountered plenty of roadkill during my years of towing, but this was different, more intense, and somehow fresher. Getting out to attach the chains, I played my flashlight around the Honda and immediately understood why the woman was so terrified. On the roof of her car were two massive handprints pressed deep into the metal. Not scratches or dents from debris, but actual palm and finger impressions where something had gripped the roof hard enough to deform it. Each handprint was easily twice the size of mine, with long finger marks that ended in what looked like claw scratches. Fuck, I muttered, running my flashlight along the car's perimeter. There were more marks. Scratches along the passenger side, like something had tested the strength of the windows, and gouges in the paint where claws had scraped across the metal. Now you see why I wouldn't get out. The woman called from inside the car, her voice muffled by the glass. I was crouched down examining the damage when the first branch broke. Not a small twig snapping under the weight of a squirrel, but a substantial branch, the kind that takes real force to break. The sound came from somewhere deeper in the trees, maybe 40 yards from where I was working. I stood up and played my flashlight in that direction, but the beam only penetrated about 20 feet into the fog before getting swallowed up. Then came another branch. Crack. This one closer, maybe 30 yards away. Then another. Crack. From a different direction entirely. Sir, the woman's voice was tight with anxiety. It's doing that thing again. What thing? The knocking. It's been doing it all night. Breaking branches, hitting trees, like it's trying to scare me. As if responding to her words, a loud thump echoed to the forest, the unmistakable sound of something heavy striking a tree trunk. Then another, from different locations around us, creating a pattern of impacts that seemed to be moving in a circle around our position. I worked faster to attach the chains, trying to keep my movements efficient and quiet. The whole time I was acutely aware of being watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you from across a room? It was like that, but amplified. Like something with very focused attention was studying every move I made and growing increasingly agitated by our presence. As I was tightening the last chain, my flashlight flickered and went out. I shook it, smacked it against my palm. Nothing. The batteries had been fresh when I started my shift, but now it was completely dead. I had a backup light in the truck, but that meant walking 20 feet in the dark. The branch knocking stopped. The forest went completely silent. Sir, what happened to your light? Battery died. I'm going to get another one from the truck. Don't leave the car. Please. The fear in her voice was palpable. And standing there in the darkness, surrounded by that oppressive silence and the lingering smell of wet animal, I found I didn't want to leave her either. I'll be right back. Just getting another flashlight. I walked to my truck as casually as I could manage, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The fog seemed to have gotten thicker, and the Honda's headlights only created small pools of illumination that made the surrounding darkness feel deeper. I grabbed my backup flashlight from the cab and was turned to head back when a sound froze me in place. It started as a low rumble, almost subsonic, that I felt in my chest before I actually heard it. Then it rose into something between a roar and a howl, a guttural, primal sound that seemed to come from something with a throat structure unlike any animal I knew. The call lasted maybe 5 seconds, echoing through the trees and seeming to come from all directions at once. When it ended, the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. That's when the creature stepped into the Honda's headlight beams. "Sir," the woman's voice was urgent now. "We need to go. Right now." I didn't argue. I climbed into my truck, put it in gear, and started pulling the Honda back toward the road. The chains were taut, the car rolling smoothly behind me, when something massive crashed through the underbrush directly in front of us. It stepped into the full glare of my headlights, and for one terrifying moment, I saw it clearly. The creature was enormous, at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in thick, shaggy, dark hair that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms so long they nearly reached its knees. Its hands ended in fingers that looked more like thick, clawed talons. But the worst part was its face. It resembled that of a human, but with proportions that shouldn't exist on neither man nor beast. The eyes were deep-set and intelligent, reflecting my headlights with yellow-green shine. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth that were designed for tearing. It stood there in the road for maybe 3 seconds, studying us with that terrifying intelligence. Then it began walking toward my truck. "Gio!" The woman screamed from behind me. "Go, go, go!" I gunned the engine, hoping to scare it off, but the creature didn't flinch. Instead, it picked up speed, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. My truck lurched forward, the Honda's weight dragging behind me, but we were moving too slowly. The creature reached my driver's side door just as I managed to get us rolling. Through the window, I found myself looking up into its face from less than 3 feet away. It placed one massive hand against my door, and I heard the metal groan under the pressure. The handprint it left behind completely covered the window. Fingers easily twice the length of a human's, with what looked like thick, black claws at the tips. For a moment, we were locked in this impossible stare down. Me gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white, and this thing studied me with eyes that held far too much awareness. I could hear its breathing, deep, measured breaths that fogged the glass between us. Then something seemed to shift in its expression, and it stepped back. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I floored the accelerator, pulling the Honda behind me as fast as the tow chains would allow. In my side mirror, I watched the creature grow smaller, but it didn't disappear into the forest. It just stood there in the middle of the road, watching us go. We didn't stop until we reached the gas station 8 miles down Route 47. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. Behind me, I could hear the woman crying. Not hysterical sobs, but the quiet crying of someone who just survived something that shouldn't be survivable. When I finally got out to unhook her car, I saw what the creature had left behind. There was a handprint pressed deep into the metal of my truck's door. Not just on the surface, but actually deformed inward like the metal was soft clay. Each finger had left a distinct impression, complete with claw marks that scratched through the paint down to bare steel. The woman stood next to me, staring at the evidence of what we'd just encountered. "Those weren't there before," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "They weren't." We stood there in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, both looking at proof that what we'd experienced was undeniably real. Physical evidence that something impossibly strong had touched our vehicles, had been close enough to kill us both if it had chosen to. "What do you think it wanted?" she asked. I thought about those intelligent eyes, the way it had studied us both so carefully. "I don't think it wanted to hurt us," I said finally. "I think it was curious." She nodded slowly, like it was trying to figure out what we were. I called in sick for the rest of my shift and drove straight home. Spent the next hour sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of my mind kept searching for explanations. Maybe someone in an elaborate suit, maybe a circus animal that had escaped. But the handprints on my truck door told a different story. No person, no matter how large, could have compressed steel like that, and no known animal moved the way that creature had moved, I still work the night shift. I still take calls along Route 47 when they come in. But now I carry extra flashlights, and I never work alone in areas where the trees grow thick and the fog rolls in heavy. I had the handprints on my truck filled and painted over, but sometimes, late at night when I'm driving those dark stretches of highway, I run my fingers over the spot where they were and remember, because whatever's out there in those woods, it's still out there, and now I know it's curious about us. That might be the most terrifying thing of all. Story 3. I deliver medical supplies to rural clinics, and one place keeps ordering blood that expired decades ago. I've been delivering medical supplies to rural clinics for 3 years. Most of my route covers isolated areas where small towns have tiny medical facilities that serve farming communities. It's steady work, nothing exciting, except for one clinic in the hills. They started ordering from us 6 months ago. Standard medical supplies at first, bandages, syringes, basic medications. But then they began requesting expired blood products. Not recently expired, blood that had been sitting in our storage for years. Blood expires after 42 days. This stuff was from 2019, 2020, even earlier. Blood that should have been incinerated long ago, but somehow got missed in our disposal cycles. The first few times, I assumed it was an administrative error. I'd call the clinic to confirm the order, but they always insisted they needed exactly what they'd requested. The older the better. The receptionist would say in this cheerful voice that made my skin crawl. The clinic is about 40 miles outside town, nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forest. It's a small building that looks more like a house than a medical facility. No signage, no parking lot, just a gravel driveway and a front door painted bright red. Every delivery, the same elderly man meets me at the door. He's always wearing scrubs that look decades old, faded, and stained. He takes the blood products immediately, but leaves the other supplies sitting in boxes by the entrance. The blood is priority, he always says. Everything else can wait. Last month, I arrived during what sounded like a procedure in progress. I could hear medical equipment beeping and multiple voices talking in urgent, clipped tones. Through the window, I saw shadows moving quickly around what looked like an operating table. But the strangest part was the smell. Not antiseptic or medical. Something sweet and metallic that made me nauseated. I knocked and waited. The voices inside went silent immediately, but the medical equipment kept beeping. After 5 minutes, the elderly man opened the door looking flustered. "You're early," he said, though I was actually 10 minutes late. "Should I come back later?" No, just leave everything here." He gestured to the doorway, without taking his eyes off me. Behind him, I could see multiple people in scrubs standing perfectly still, like they were waiting for me to leave. That's when I noticed the floor. Dark stains spread across what should have been clean medical tile, leading from the entrance toward the back rooms. Fresh stains. "What kind of procedures do you perform here?" I asked. His smile was wrong. Too wide, showing teeth that were gray and pointed. "We specialize in blood disorders. Very rare conditions that require vintage treatments." I left quickly that day, but I couldn't stop thinking about those stains, or the fact that they'd ordered 60 units of expired blood that week alone. Enough for major surgery. But what kind of surgery requires decades-old blood? 2 weeks ago, I made a mistake. I arrived at the clinic, but forgot to bring their main order, 40 units of blood from 2018. I only had current supplies in my truck. When I explained the situation, the elderly man's expression changed completely. His fake pleasant demeanor vanished, replaced by something predatory. "We need the old blood," he said. "Only the old blood works for our patients. I can bring it tomorrow." Our patient is on the table now. She's been waiting for hours. Through the window, I could see someone lying on the operating table in the back room, but they weren't moving at all. No chest rising and falling, no shifting position. They look like a corpse. "Is your patient live?" I asked. "She will be," he said, "once we give her what she needs." I got back in my truck immediately and drove away. In my rear-view mirror, I saw multiple figures in scrub come outside and watch me leave. They stood there until I was completely out of sight. I tried researching the clinic online, but found nothing. No medical license, no business registration, no records of it existing at all. The address officially belongs to an empty lot, but they keep placing orders. 50 units last week, 70 units yesterday, all expired blood dating back years. I stopped delivering there personally and sent my assistant instead. He came back pale and shaking. There were bodies, he whispered, on tables throughout the building. Dozens of them. Some looked fresh, others looked old, really old, but they were all connected to 4 drips of that black, spoiled blood. Were they alive? I don't know, but when I walked past, some of them opened their eyes and looked at me. We reported it to the sheriff, but when deputies went to investigate, they found only an empty building. No medical equipment, no bodies, no evidence of any activity. But the orders keep coming, and now they're not just requesting expired blood. Yesterday's order included seeking blood products from 1987 to 1995. Any available inventory from deceased donors preferred. Urgent need for long-term preservation specimens. Blood from people who died decades ago. Blood that's been sitting in freezers for longer than I've been alive. I think whatever's in that clinic isn't treating patients. I think it's creating them. Story 4. We went on a camping trip in Appalachia. Never again. Frankly, I'm on the fence when it comes to the supernatural. I'm not completely sold, but I'm not going to rule out completely. However, recently, I've decided to reconsider that belief. This story happened a month or so ago in July. Me and my friends had planned out this exciting camping trip to Appalachia. We had an Airbnb and everything prepared. Okay, don't judge me. I didn't want to sleep in a tent. Anyways, it would be a nice change of pace from Iowa. I'd take trees over cornfields any days. The only caveat was the 12-hour drive. Now, before I continue the story, I'll introduce my friends so none of you all are confused. I've got 3 other friends. There's Emma, Matt, and Parker. We have brought along Emma's little brother, who I'll call C since he's a minor. Emma's parents were arrested for things that aren't really important for this story, but now C's under Emma's legal guardianship, and she couldn't find a babysitter for him. None of us really cared. In fact, we thought C was cool. Anyways, we arrived at the Airbnb and unpacked. There were 3 rooms, so I got a room alone, Matt and Parker got a room together, and Emma and C got a room together. I got lucky. Now, it was around 6 p.m.-ish, probably. So we decided to set up a campfire and start roasting marshmallows. We ended up forgetting the marshmallows. No matter, me and Matt decided to go drive to the nearest town and pick up some from the store. C wasn't happy, but we assured him that we'll be back in 10 minutes. While driving to the store, me and Matt talk about Appalachia. Maybe we'll see a skinwalker, said Matt. Dude, shut up. Aren't those things located in Navajo territories? There's no way we'd encounter one here in Appalachia, I said, and I knew I was right. We arrived at the local convenience store and argued over what kind of marshmallows we should get. I suggested regular marshmallows. Matt suggested pink marshmallows. We eventually came to a decision, and I bought a Hershey's bar as well, since I figured we'd need extra, considering how much a fat-ass Parker is when it comes to candy. After paying, we drove back to the Airbnb. C told me that he saw a deer and was very proud of getting close to it. Emma affirmed this. Apparently, this deer's eyes were in front of its head, but it didn't appear hostile, so she lets C get close enough to it to not disturb it in any way. In addition to roasting marshmallows, we'd be making burgers and hot dogs. We lit the fireplace and began cooking the meats. That is when a hiker walked up to our campfire. He had a duffel bag, introduced himself as Josh. He asked if he could use our campfire. We were weirded out, but agreed. Josh opened his duffel bag, revealing a bunch of different kinds of meat. There was chicken, beef, venison, and what looked like pork. Emma questioned this. and Josh states that he thinks it's pork. He found it in a cooler tucked underneath the blind. According to Josh, there was no one around, so he took it. Emma immediately states that she wants the pork. She absolutely loves bacon. Josh shrugs and agrees, but does warn Emma that he didn't know how long the pork was left out there. Emma ignored his warning and insisted on having it. Parker spoke with Josh while me, Emma, and Matt were trying not to horribly burn the meats. Once finished, I had some burgers. Matt and Parker ate some hot dogs and some of Josh's gang, while Emma ate the pork. Emma started to feel sick. Damn. So the pork was left out for a while. Josh just threw out the rest of the pork, and Emma went to go puke. We finished eating dinner and began roasting marshmallows. We had way too many marshmallows, so we couldn't actually finish them all, but as expected, Parker's fat ass finished the Hershey's bar. I went to check on Emma. She had finished puking, and she looked a little pale, not a sickly pale, just drained. I told her to take some Pepto and get some sleep. I didn't want to hold to make her feel bad or think that she somehow ruined this trip. I went back outside to wave goodbye to Josh, who warned about black bears. Then me, Parker, Matt, and C hung out for an hour before it started to sprinkle and then rain. We went inside and decided to just go to sleep. Emma didn't want to sleep in the same room as C since she was sick with God knows what and didn't want it to spread to C. Matt figured it was just food poisoning, but still had C crash in my room instead. I didn't protest, but I made it clear that I wasn't happy. So much for sleeping alone. Anyways, we got ready for bed and fell asleep. Well, C did. I did not. It heard loud rustling outside. Didn't think too much about it. But what was strange was quiet everything was. It got up and opened up my window a crack to let air in and didn't hear anything. No cicadas, no insects, nothing. Just the wind howling through the trees and the rain. I shut the window and went back to bed. I laid in bed for a few minutes before I heard something get thrown at the window. I turned my head to look at the window. Nothing but darkness. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I got up and walked to the living room. I had to make sure if I locked all the doors. The floor creaked under every step I made. To check the front door, locked. I checked the back door, locked as well. But then I heard Emma's voice. She was on the other end of the glass door. "Let me in," said Emma. I looked through the glass door and didn't see anyone, but then again, I couldn't see anything much at all. "Emma, what are you doing out there?" I asked. It took her a second to respond, but she eventually did a simple, "It's cold." This struck me as odd, so I went to Emma's room and found her, sleeping on her bed, facing away from the door. I froze. If Emma was here then who was outside? I slowly closed the door, but stopped. I noticed she was in a fetal position while sleeping and mumbling. The fetal position wasn't the strange part. She did puke a few hours earlier, but the mumbling. Emma doesn't talk in her sleep. I know that for a fact, and what she was mumbling was weird. She was mumbling in no language I recognized. I grabbed the desk lamp, just in case. I pushed the door open and walked in. I held the lamp-like weapon. I looked as she turned over to face me, and then she opened her eyes. We both screamed, and I dropped the lamp to her. It looked like I was going to hit her over the head, and her scream had startled me. Parker and Matt walked into the room. They looked annoyed. "The hell happened?" asked Matt. I explained that I heard Emma's voice outside. I looked at Emma. She looked fine. Too fine. She didn't look like she threw up only hours prior. I looked at her pillow. A little bit of her hair was on the pillow, like it fell out. We walked out to the living room, and Parker opened the back door and stepped outside, only to soak by the rain. However, a cold, eerily cold breeze crept into the Airbnb. It stepped out with Parker and turned on my phone to use it as a flashlight. We saw footprints, human footprints. Me and Parker went, "Oh hell no," and went inside, locked the door, and we barricaded the shit out of it. Emma asked if it was Josh. Matt shot down that idea. Josh was far too nice, not the stalk innocent campers type. Suddenly, we heard a knock on the back door. "Hey, open up," said a voice that sounded exactly like Josh. Emma snapped, "Go to hell?" It was out of character for her. It almost seemed territorial. The thing outside stopped. It began circling the Airbnb. tapping on the walls before seeming to leave. We all decided to just go back to sleep. Day 2. The events of the previous night were still imprinted into our brains. We made breakfast, which Emma swallowed up like it was her last meal. We agreed to cut the trip short. After breakfast, we packed up and went outside only to find my van's tires slashed. Shit, our phones didn't have service due to the storm the previous night, and the closest town was a mile or so away. If we wanted to get new tires, we had to push the car through the forest for a mile, but we didn't have a choice. We put C in the car, along with Emma and me, Parker, and Matt began to push. However, we stopped. Yeah, it'd be hard. Even harder downhill. The road winds and twists. It'll roll downhill and right into a tree if we push it. We were trapped. We accepted defeat and just went back inside the Airbnb. I silently prayed that we wouldn't have to stay a second night in this godforsaken place. Emma kept getting hungry and ate through a majority of our snacks. Everyone was getting weirded out by her behavior. I went outside to look at the tracks from the previous night. Human, yes, absolutely. I followed them, I wasn't stupid. So I didn't follow them into the tree lines. I saw how they seemed to shift into that of a bear. I stepped back and ran back to the Airbnb. Before entering, I saw a truck pass and waved him down. It was Josh. He thanked me for letting him cook dinner for himself at the fire pit. Josh then looked at my van and saw the slashed tires. Damn, he said, what happened? I don't know. I told him. I then asked if he was outside the Airbnb last night. Josh looked at me and said that his home is decently far from here. He was not here. Josh, however, said something that almost made me jump. He could attach my van to his truck and drive us to the town. I agreed and thanked him. I ran inside to get the others. We watched from the porch as Josh knelt by the hitch. Eventually, he let us get in and began driving us to the town. I was in the passenger seat of his truck, while the others were crammed in the van. I looked at the tree line. I could swear I could see a shadow dash between the trees. Josh broke the silence and asked where I was from. I told him, and he laughed, a nervous laugh. Josh glanced toward the trees and asked if I had seen that too. I froze. He had seen it too, that thing between the trees. I could see Josh started to panic slightly. He pressed harder on the gas. Whatever was out there, it was chasing us. It didn't want us to leave. Josh honked the horn in a clear attempt to scare it away, but it didn't. We noticed the most putrid odor that I have ever smelt. It was so pungent that even with the windows closed, we could still smell it. It followed us all the way until we made it to the town. Josh drove us to the car shop and unattached my van. We paid for new tires and put them on. Finally, we could leave. We thanked Josh one final time and then began driving all the way back to Iowa. I prayed it didn't follow us home. It didn't seem to follow us, and we drove back without issue except for Emma. She was off, a little more violent, and it even started freaking out C. She insisted on beef jerky instead of her typical spicy chips. She barely spoke after that, never replied to texts, never picked up our calls, and barely attended our college classes. None of it. In fact, last I saw of her was recently, when she picked up C from his first day of school. She seemed off, thinner, hollow even, eyes were sunken in. I walked up to her and tried talking with her. She said nothing and just got into her car. I spoke to C. He told me that he didn't feel safe with her anymore. I'm concerned for Emma and C. I don't know what happened to her. If anyone out there has any ideas of what I could do, please tell me, because I don't know what to do now. Story 5. I met a neighbor's dog one night, taking out the trash. This happened when I was about 14 years old. It still sits ingrained in my memory. We moved a few times in my life. My parents taught school, but eventually, my father took a role in a country church in the rural U.S. A good, quiet community. Folks were nice enough, and we settled in just fine. Our home was not far from the church facility itself, out in rural farmland. Our home was one of those typical country houses with a long driveway, at least 300 feet from the house to the road. My main chore/job was to take out all the trash and take out the trash bin to the roadside for garbage pickup the next morning. I collect all the interior trash, get into the bin, and get my shoes on and roll up the driveway and up to the road. It was a clear night. The stars were out, and though there was some dim glow from the town we lived in, you could see them clearly enough. We had a nearby neighbor in the next land plot over, whose property was mostly cornfields, and some woods lining the property up next to ours. This becomes relevant in a bit. I'm walking down the driveway, whistling a favorite tune, looking up at the stars, dragging the heavy trash bin full of garbage out toward the road. Things get darker as I head down the driveway, but I knew my way pretty well by then, the distant glow of the front porch light giving me a slight guide. Halfway up the driveway or so, I froze when I looked to the left. The silhouette of a white canine stood there, staring at me. At first, I started to panic, thinking it was a wolf. But then I realized that didn't make sense, as there are no wolves where we lived. I slowly started moving forward again, thinking it was no big deal. Then a thought dawned on me. There are coyotes out there, but white coyotes shouldn't exist around here. That seems odd. I decided to move at a faster pace. At that moment, the canine comes out of the woods and starts moving towards me, slowly at first. My heart leapt into my throat. It then speeds up into a trot, beelining towards me. I'm really beginning to sweat as, though I've made it to the road, there's barely any light out there, and I don't have anything blunt I can use to defend myself if this thing is hostile. The animal gets close enough that I can see it's obviously just a dog, not a wolf or coyote or anything scary. It comes up and just stops. No sniffing, no friendly actions toward me, but no hostility either. It just stands and stares at me. In the dim glow of the porch light, I see it has a black collar on, with a little tag shining on it. The tag is square in shape and has a name on it. Buck. The dog, I presume is named Buck, eventually stops staring at me and slowly moves on beyond our driveway. It stops abruptly, takes a defensive stance, and starts growling in a low rumble. This is where I became unsettled. I looked at where the dog was staring and growling. Just across the road in the cornfield, I see a pair of glowing something. 2 dots. I can't tell, they're just eyes shining for maybe a bobcat or a deer or something else. The issue is, they were too high up off the ground to be a small animal. Almost like something taller, standing there. Something felt very off about that moment. And just as I began to consider what those dots were, the dog lurched forward, barking and sprinting towards them. They disappeared into the cornfield, the tall corn plants rustling, with the dog darting in after. I'm slowly backing away, the crickets chirping like a harmony to this entire situation, when all of a sudden, the scariest howl I'd ever heard rang out. My fight or flight. Instinct kicked in, and I went into an all-out sprint for the house. Got inside and locked the storm door and front door immediately. I'm in a cold sweat, and my dad asks what happened. I tell him what occurred outside and where the dog had come from, and he decides we go over and ask our neighbor if maybe it was her dog, and I just witnessed it catching a deer or coyote or something it wanted. The next morning, we got up, had breakfast, then walked over to our neighbor's house to describe to him the events of last night. I tell him the description of the dog and saw a tag named Buck on it. He stands there, bites his lower lip, then asks if we're sure that's what we saw. I tell him I was certain. Black collar, square tag with the word Buck on it. He takes us to his backyard near his metal barn, to a small wooden cross with a black dog collar hanging on it. A square tag with the word Buck on it. Buck was my farm dog and best friend for 12 years. He died last year. My wife and I will never forget him. Son, I'm not sure what you saw, but that can't have been my dog. My heart both sank and started beating rapidly at the same time. What did I see last night? We lived at that home for another 2 years, without any further incidents, before eventually moving away to another place in SW, Missouri, where I lived until I moved out for college. I will never forget that night, and everywhere I've lived since has been well lit with short driveways and no cornfields nearby. Good dog. Story 6. The time I heard the witch's laughter. For context, this took place when I was in 4th to 5th grade. I remember it was summer, and like most kids, I went outside during the days and wandered the streets and woods with neighborhood friends. Behind our street was a strip of power lines that I wasn't allowed back into. A few summers prior, a tick had given me Lyme disease, and I spent a few days in the hospital. So it's understandable why my parents wouldn't want me walking in tall, grassy parts of the woods or climbing trees anymore. One of these days that summer, my 2 friends and I were walking the neighborhood when someone came up with the idea to go into the power lines and explore. As we took the right off the street and began walking in the woods, I became hesitant. I was scared of getting in trouble with my parents. However, after expressing this, they told me to stay behind if I wanted and kept chugging along. Everything up to this point is normal. About 20 seconds go by, and I'm standing by myself in about 100 yards of woods between the power lines and the road. This is where things take a turn. In bright daylight, I start hearing music like staticky radio music I've never heard before. This was like an ordinary radio song by Kesha or Rihanna back in the early 2010s. It was instrumental and repetitive, if that makes any sense. I quickly wrote it off as a car going by, but the music was not moving from the source like a moving car would as it drove down the street. I also knew no car would be parked on that part of the road as it was quite busy, and I would have seen it through the brush. It sounded like a radio just sat there in the woods out of sight. Then it got worse. I began to hear children's laughter over the music of the radio. It was getting louder. All this happened in seconds. I looked in all directions. Nothing but woods, the road, and power lines I could see through the brush about 40 yards out in each direction. My friends were only about 200 yards away, but they were out of sight. Then I start hearing her voice, plain as day, coming from all directions as if she were in my head. She tells me to come to her in a creepy tone. "Come, my sweet little boy, come over to me," or something along those lines. She was beckoning me, trying to lure me in like a child from Hansel and Gretel. I remember trying to tell myself this is in my head, while still grasping what is happening. This made no sense in the moment. I remember still looking around and seeing nobody, no source of the music or laughter, or voices that are plain as day. Then I start hearing footsteps behind me, getting closer. Again, a plain day. I still hear the crunching of the leaves below her feet. I never saw anything. However, fight or flight kicked in, and I ran to my friends as fast as possible. Not 10 seconds later, I catch them in my line of sight, walking as if they were just chatting. I was shaking as I caught up to them. I thought they could have been messing with me, but nothing adds up, maybe the speaker in the woods. But the footsteps were with no one there, and the voice was in all directions. This is not something I made up. This was not a dream. I spoke to my friend years later, and she remembered me catching up to them. This was by far the scariest experience I can recall. Story 7. A masked man has given me a list of rules in my dreams. If I break them, he punishes me. When I first saw the masked man, it was 10:37 p.m. on Tuesday, April 18, 2002. I remember because my parents had allowed me to stay up an extra hour to watch my favorite TV show, Bear Time with Mr. Teddy. A few minutes after falling asleep, it became clear that this was not the dreamland I was accustomed to. There were no toys or friends or hugs from Mom. Instead, there was him. He always appeared from darkness, gliding on a wave of black, formless and faceless as dream itself. The masked man neither smiled nor threatened, never shouted nor heralded his own presence. I never saw the back of the masked man, but what I did see of him revealed nothing about what sort of person he might be behind that mask. It was a long, thin facade, not unlike images I would later see of plague doctors in medieval Europe, but it was wider and lacked the queer bird-like appearance of those erstwhile medicine men. That is not to say that the mask was not queer. It shone black, and when I stared deeply into its rippling surface, I saw what looked like whole worlds disappearing into its unnatural depths. All at once, without any perceptible movement on the part of him, a tube appeared at his hand. In the inexplicable way that dreams reveal themselves to us, I knew that the tube should be feared. My skin erupted in cold sweat, and I tried to scream, but just as the blackness of his mask stole whatever light surrounded the man's face, it quieted all sound. I had been enveloped in the inky blackness and felt its frigid touch across my small, 5-year-old body. But nothing could prepare me for the hell that came next. With no warning, the masked man flung his tube towards me and watched as it attached itself to my mouth. I attempted to pry it away, but the thing merely became stuck to my hands as well. And so, helplessly, I watched with widening eyes as the tube slowly curled into my mouth, down my throat, and into my lungs. I could do nothing but plead with silent, watering eyes, locked onto the masked man as he stood, silent and inscrutable, and as the tube filled my lungs with the same inky blackness until I felt that I would burst. All the while a loud, hoarse, screeching noise erupted around the void, rising ever higher in volume and urgency. For minutes and minutes on end I gasped, or attempted to gasp, as the cold, glue-like shadows crushed me from within. At the same time, my entire body began to weaken more and more until the sensation was nearly as frightening as the all-consuming asphyxiation. After watching this brutal torture, for how long I could not have guessed, the masked man held up a scroll. It was empty, and I was confused by the gesture. As I watched, the masked man dragged a scorched claw across the top of the scroll to reveal, in glowing black letters, a single phrase, a command: "Do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy." I woke, heaving and covered in cold sweat. Naturally, I screamed for my parents, who rushed into the room and held me. They were quick to remind me that dreams can't hurt you, that they love me, that the masked man wasn't real. As a child, you believe the things you're told. Because you're a child, your parents are all-knowing gods, and because you know nothing. So I believed that the masked man didn't exist. But even at 5 years old, I couldn't help but think that whether he existed or not was almost beside the point. The pain that he had inflicted was very real, and I would do anything not to feel it again. I thought about the scroll that the masked man had held, with its simple imperative: do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy. Bear Time was my favorite show, and I definitely didn't want to give it up because of some silly dream. But the memory of the black tar, the drowning, and the pain made me hesitate. All of the next day, I thought about the masked man. Even bringing him to mind made me start to shiver with aftershocks of the pain. My little 5-year-old body vibrated like it was hooked up to a live wire. Mrs. Grayson, my kindergarten teacher, asked me what was wrong, and I told her that I'd had a nightmare. She smiled at me, put a comforting hand on my shoulder, and said not to worry. She taught me a song that would make any monsters leave me alone. Bad men go away. Come again another day. Little Jamie wants to play. Come again another day. In my young mind, I'd just been given a shield against the masked man. So that night, I turned on Bear Time, without a care in the world. Looking back on it, I don't remember much about the show itself. I just remember how comforting it felt to watch it, like being wrapped in a warm hug. It brings to mind that famous Maya Angelou quote: "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." After the show was over, it was time for me to go to sleep. My parents surrounded me with my favorite toys, turned out the lights, and soon I was snoring peacefully under the covers. Almost immediately, the masked man returned. He glided into frame of my mind's eye, trailing his cold, inky blackness. We locked eyes, and I pulled myself up to my full 4 feet of height and began singing Mrs. Grayson's song: "Bad men go away. Come again another day. Little Jamie wants to play. Come again another day." But the masked man had no reaction whatsoever to my voice. Instead, he glided closer and closer until my words began to disappear into the shining blackness of his mask. He stood there with his head pointed vaguely in my direction, spreading dark tendrils across my body until suddenly his arm shot out towards me, and that same all-consuming hoarse screech came from everywhere and nowhere. The tubes of black curled to my mouth and nose and down, down, down into my lungs. That unbearable pressure began to build, and the suffocation started to squeeze, and my eyes started to bulge, and through it all an irresistible panic rose from my chest until it was all I could feel. Along with the panic came that same overwhelming weakness, which drained every drop of strength from my petrified muscles. Soon, I was incapable of motion without Herculean effort. Pointing at the masked man became unthinkable as running an Olympic marathon. But with tremendous pain and determination, I was able to move the muscles of my eyes until my pupils pointed in his direction, silently pleading with him to end my suffering. Or, if not that, at least my life. Instead, he stared back with that cold, inscrutable visage and held up a scroll, tapping on the first line which, still, read, "Do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy." Eventually, I woke from this hell and screamed for my parents once again. They held me, rocked me, and whispered soothing words into my ears. But I was beyond inconsolable. There could no longer be any doubt. The masked man was real. Even through cold sweat and tears, my traumatized 5-year-old mind was beginning to come to terms with my new reality. I lived at the pleasure of the masked man. From then on, I refused to watch Bear Time. My parents tried to put on the next night to get me to sleep, but I screamed and hid my face under the blankets, shaking uncontrollably and shouting to the masked man that I wouldn't watch, that I hadn't watched it, that I was being a good boy. They turned it off and exchanged glances which looked almost as terrified as I felt. As a child, the idea that your parents could be as afraid as you does not enter your mind. They aren't people like you. They're the ones who are supposed to know. But nobody really understood the masked man. For a while I managed to avoid him. I'd even begun to convince myself that he was just a nightmare. But then one night, he came again, gliding on his wave of black. As the terror and the pain surrounded me, a new sensation spread across my mind. Indignation. I'd followed the rule, hadn't I? It had been weeks since I'd watched Bear Time. Not even a glimpse of it on the screen. Of course, I was unable to plead my case to the masked man and could only stand their suffering's silent agony. This time, however, when he held up the scroll, his dark claw dragged across the second line and revealed another command. Do not take an even number of steps on any given day. Eyes open, bedroom dark, screaming, parents rushing in. Still, even after I had suffered through the pain several times, it was overwhelming. It isn't true what they say, that time heals all wounds. Some of them just fester and poison your blood. From then on, I counted each step that I took. 1, good. 2, bad. 3, good. Kids at school began to look at me funny. Then they stopped wanting to play with me. I hardly noticed, so consumed was I with my counting. It was life, the counting. A single misstep, and the masked man would return. Not everyone avoided me. There was one boy named Alan who was also special. Our parents thought it would be good for us to spend some time together, so they shipped me off to his house one weekend for a sleepover. It hadn't occurred to them to wonder whether we had anything in common besides our mutual isolation. As it turned out, we didn't. Alan was sitting in a corner, stacking Legos when I came in. I asked Alan if he wanted to build something with me, but he just kept stacking and didn't even seem to realize that I was there. When I tapped him on the shoulder, he shoved me hard onto the ground. I yelled at him and shoved him back. His parents came in to separate us, and I was afraid that they'd be upset with me. But this was apparently not the first time that Alan had had an issue with shoving. They told him, very sternly, not to do it again and left the room. Alan reluctantly agreed to let me add blocks to his tower, but only if I put them where he wanted them to go. As I busied myself finding the very particular pieces that he described to me, i.e., get the yellow one with 2 dots sideways and 3 dots up and down, a terrifying thought occurred to me. Did Alan should count as a step? I hadn't taken it myself, but I had moved. Before that, the count was 2,137. Was I at 2,138 now? Should I take another? Alan interrupted my thoughts by yelling at me for putting the yellow block on the wrong side of the tower. I moved it quietly and went back to trying to work it out. It wasn't as if I could ask the masked man for clarification. He only showed up in my dreams, and then only to torture me. That night, after Alan's parents had put us to bed, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Maybe if I didn't fall asleep, the masked man couldn't hurt me. The count would reset tomorrow after all, but then wouldn't he just punish me when I did fall asleep? I figured that it was worth a try, and that at the very least I could spare myself the pain for this one night. So I kept myself awake all through the night, which was 6-year-old, my birthday had just recently come and gone, felt like years. In the morning, I started to count again, but couldn't help but be distracted by this legalistic minefield I had entered. All I could think about, every time my mind wandered, was the last time the masked man had come, how much it had hurt, and how desperate I was to avoid it happening again. So I stayed awake that night too, and the night after that, and the night after that. But there's only so long that you can keep your eyes open before your brain will make you sleep. Later, as an adult, I read extensively about the science of sleep to determine if there was any way to remove the need for it altogether. As it happened, there was an odd case of an American man who was born without any need for sleep. He sat in his rocking chair and read a newspaper every night and got up refreshed in the morning. Another man, a soldier from Hungary, claimed to have lost the need for sleep after a gunshot to the head. Yet another man, a farmer from Thailand, claimed to have not needed sleep ever since a childhood fever. None of these cases was ever explained or conclusively verified. I, however, was not like these people. Sleep was an absolute necessity, and it claimed me whether I liked it or not. This time, however, the masked man did not come. Apparently, the shove from Alan had not counted. Of course, I had no way to know this as I was drifting off, and the last sensation that went through my mind before darkness claimed me was one of absolute terror. I woke shaking, but quickly realized that I'd managed to avoid the masked man. A feeling of all-consuming relief flooded my body, and I sobbed, not in fear, but out of the sheer happiness of avoiding torture. Then I began to think about how sad it was that this fact brought me so much joy. This was a thought that would inhabit me throughout my life. The quiet, brutal dissonance between my life and the norm. Why was it that I, a seemingly good kid with no sins I could think of, was condemned to this existence of endless calculation just to avoid pain, when others ran and played outside in the sun without a care in the world? I glanced out the window at the rising sun and saw a boy and a girl not much older than me playing with a ball in the street. I thought about how, if that were me, I would be counting each step and cover my eyes to avoid any nearby television screens. I thought about how unfair it all was, and began crying all over again, but this time for real. I turned my face to the ceiling, up to the sky, up to God, and whispered a tiny, childlike prayer, asking for an end of pain. But there was only silence in return. Years later, I would read the work of French philosopher Albert Camus, and come across his discussion of the absurdity of a world that places conscious beings into a position where they are faced with the unreasonable silence of the world. It occurred to me then, and occurs to me now, that this rather understates the matter. The world may be silent, but that silence rarely feels unreasonable. It felt to that small, terrified 6-year-old boy like an accusation of a terrible crime. And after many years, I began to believe that this was the case. The more I was hurt, the more I began to feel like I deserved the hurt and hated myself for it. What an awful person I must be. I thought to myself, why else would I be in pain all the time? But this was before I learned the most terrible secret of existence. Justice is only the most cruel of the lies we tell ourselves to sleep peacefully at night. The free prize we were promised at the bottom of the cereal box of life, only to find cheap cardboard and the saccharine sweet face of some corporate mascot. At least I'd avoided the pain for one more day. Or so I thought. The next night, when I went to sleep, I saw the masked man and immediately tried to wake myself up. This was another tactic I explored through years, but to no avail. I once paid a surgeon from the former Soviet Union to watch me while I slept and wake me at the first sign of a nightmare. He told me when I woke that he had tried everything he could think of. Drugs, deep brain stimulation, you name it. But nothing could interrupt the horrific penance demanded by the masked man. That night, however, I was just confused. I had been certain to count my steps and avoid television screens, and knew that I had followed the rules. Nevertheless, the same inky blackness curled into my lungs and had me gasping against its frigid tendrils. The same unbearable weakness drained my body of the last of its strength. As it happened, I assumed that this was a delayed reaction to my misstep with Alan. The masked man must have come just a day too late. But instead, he dragged his claw across the third line on the scroll to reveal another command. Always wear green on Thursdays. And so, From then on, I always wore green on Thursdays. It was clear then that the masked man intended to continue adding rules to his list. Even if I followed each one to the letter, there was always another ready to reveal itself and draw his wrath. As the months wore on, the masked man added more and more rules, each time taking his pound of flesh in my dreams. The number of rules was becoming difficult to manage, so I kept a list of them in a piece of paper in my breast pocket by my heart. Later, I would keep it in my phone, so I could check it whenever I needed. Even Alan stopped hanging out with me after that. The other kids ignored me for the most part, but some thought it was funny to mess up my count, or to steal one item or another of clothing that the masked man had ordered me to wear. Eventually, it became impossible for my parents to ignore my bizarre behavior, and they insisted that I talk to a shrink. At first, I thought that maybe he would be able to help, but after a month or two of breathing exercises and meditation, I realized that he was just as ill-prepared to deal with the masked man as my parents had been. I saw him once a week, mostly to appease them, but knew that he wouldn't stop the masked man from coming. Over the years, I withdrew more and more from the world. I made a friend here or there, but they would always quietly slip away when it became clear that I couldn't leave the house for more than a few minutes at a time. By then I had become completely consumed by doing the masked man's bidding. I was always doing my counting. I was terrified to see a television screen or a red door handle. I was forbidden from constructing a sentence which contained 2 words with 5 syllables each, and so on and so on. But even with that constant vigilance, I was not good enough to stop his appearances entirely. He still came some nights, and each time the pain was worse than the last. Once in a while, I found a girl willing to put up with these eccentricities, but they never stayed for long. I dropped out of college after attending classes became too great of a risk. My campus was in a wooded area, and I was forbidden from seeing more than 2 oak trees a day. Little by little, I stopped leaving the house altogether. I managed to find a remote job entering numbers into a table. I clicked here and there, moving the squiggles into correct columns until they turned green. When I'd saved up enough money, I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere, far from any possible reasons to trigger an appearance by the masked man. And this is where I've been for the last few years. My skin is bleached white from lack of exposure to the sun. My hands are so pale that if I hold them up to the window, they almost blend in with the clouds. Last night, I peered at myself in the mirror and saw a gaunt unperson staring back. Inside, I'm still that small, terrified child who first saw the masked man, but the man in the mirror looks far older than his 28 years. He is bent, wizened, and weak. His hair is prematurely thinning, and his hands shake with the very effort of life. He is tired of this existence. Even with his self-imposed imprisonment, the masked man still comes, still exacts his terrible price. And so, he has decided that today is the last day. I watch as he reaches into the medicine cabinet to retrieve a revolver. He opens it, checks to make sure that the bullets are loaded, blows some dust off the barrel, and closes it again. He places it against his forehead and smiles a little skeletal smile. Finally he will be free of the masked man. He has waited his entire life to say those words. He's always known that this was a way out, but he hasn't had the courage to do it until today. He presses his finger to the trigger, intending to pull it, when all of a sudden he's gripped by an all-consuming terror. His eyes roll back into his head, and he falls to the floor. As his body shakes uncontrollably, his mind is in a very familiar void, all made of black, formless and faceless. A masked man glides on a wave of darkness until he stands before the skeletal figure. The masked man raises him up and points to his scroll as the tendrils begin to wind their way into the figure's mouth. As the figure's eyes widen and he begins to gag with a familiar black agony, the masked man drags his claw across the scroll to reveal one final command, the last one on the list, the last one he will ever need. Do not die. Story 8. I thought someone else had found a secret room in my church. Churches always have secrets. They are too old and too important not to. I used to enjoy the fact that I knew all the ins and outs of that building, but now I wish that I didn't. Over the course of the last year, I've been slowly earning back my parents' trust. If you ever went to college and met a guy who started out a devout Christian and ended up a drunken failure, you know what I was like. It apparently happens fairly often. People like me just can't handle suddenly not having their overbearing parents no longer watching them and go a little too far with their freedom. I dropped out and had to crawl back to my family where I went through the 10 steps, and I like to think I've turned myself around. Despite my thoughts, however, my parents have been reluctant to trust me again. So in order to get them back on my side, I've been doing a number of favors for the church on my own time, as it's quite frankly the only thing that seems to work. Slowly I've been inching my way towards my failure being a joke that we laugh about instead of the thing we pretend didn't happen. Today I had volunteered to help get rid of some rust that has started growing on the metal legs of some stairs in the church balcony. Rust dissolver takes some time to set in before you can actually scrub it away, so I had a half hour to wait, and I unfortunately got nostalgic. Both my parents worked within the school that the church was associated with. Over the 24 years of my life, I've lived and breathed this building. I know about the secret tunnel that was made in the 80s. I know about the hidden elevator that's used just for a storage room. I've been in every room of the original campus. Until the day I thought I was the only person who had. In order to get across how strange and unsettling what happened I need to give some background on the church as a building. The original campus was created over 100 years ago by German immigrants. The building was made out of brick and has glass windows so old, valuable, and irreplaceable that they are protected by bulletproof glass. 50 years after that they built on the first edition, the church has a Gothic revival architecture, the kind that you see stand out in the middle of a modern city. The first edition is simply a block. It's a brick block that they built onto the side. It is as simple as can be. Then they started getting the checks. During my lifetime, the church made 2 more additions to the original campus, modern and sleek in a way that contrasted that old German brick. In a way, you can almost view the passage of time by walking around the city block that the church had spread out to. From there, at least 3 other schools had been branched out. When I went to school on the original campus once every 2 months, or so, we would have an assembly where a new comically large check would be presented from some Inc. or company, and all the students would all thank the nice businessman in unison. Every room in this campus is used. Kids are pouring out of the windows during the school year, and in the summer multiple groups use the campus as a base of operations. Out of all the hard-to-find nooks and crannies, only 2 places are really secret. The tunnels I mentioned earlier and the second tower. Like any good church worth its salt, this one has a bell tower. It's used every week and isn't a secret at all. But when they built the church back in the 1900s, they copied blueprints from a church back in Germany that had 2 towers. At the time, the large checks had not started coming in, so they didn't end up finishing the second tower. Instead, they roofed it off at around half to 3/4 the height of the main tower and left it. From the outside, you can see the difference clear as day. Until today, I thought that me and my dad were the only ones who knew how to get to it. As I said, when I was waiting for the rust dissolver to set in, I got nostalgic. The balcony where I was cleaning was in the upper part of the church and had a small door that took you to the bell tower. I had been up there a few times for different reasons, but the one that I always remember was when I went up on September 11, 2013. And yes, before you comment, I know I've been talking about towers, but the only relation that date has to this story is why I was going up there. A fire station is about 2 blocks from the church. I was born right before September 11th, so every year of my life, except the first bells, have been rung in 4 sets of 5 to honor the firefighters that gave their lives. Specifically, what the school does is they bring all the kids out and line them up by the station and have them all stand still with the firefighters. I was 12 at the time and had gone on that silent walk a number of times. Students never really stayed quiet, and the teachers had to stay on their toes in order to try and keep the whole thing presentable. A few teachers came down with the same flu some kid had brought in, and it was all hands on deck. So in order to save another teacher, they pulled me from the line and told me to meet my dad on the balcony. My dad told me on the way up that they picked me because they knew if I fell down and broke my leg that my family wouldn't sue them. The tower was filled with scrapped old metal from past repair that had piled up over a century. plus the wooden steps that led up had gaps a stupid and small person could potentially go through. So taking a goody two-shoes like me with their dad, watching them was probably the right choice. If you are wondering why two people had to be present to operate the bell, you have to ring the bells and also stop them. If you didn't stop the reverb, it would go on for too long. So 2 ropes hung from the ceiling at different points, one for each purpose. Similar to that stupid rust dissolver, we had a bit of time to wait until the bells were needed. For whatever reason, my dad was in a great mood. He let me walk up to the actual ceiling, which is crazy as I think about it, as it wasn't even stairs that went up. Literal floorboards had been shoved into the side of the wall that you climbed up. It was awesome. On the way down, I had the ability to look on the other side pile of scrap metal and notice that a rectangular door was on the other side. My dad let me shimmy past them and open it up. It was the attic of the church. As I said, the first tower is the tallest and the second is a little shorter, but the attic was a portion in between that was probably 1/2 as tall as the bell tower. It was very dark, but on the other side was a door with light outlining. I asked my dad to borrow his phone so I could use the flashlight on it. He tossed it to me and told me to keep track of time, as I needed to be back in around 5 minutes to help with the bells. That sounds so bad for a parent to do, but I swear this was the only time I can remember my father being like this. Flashing the light around the room is made of 3 platforms with 2 large gaps in between. At the bottom of the gaps were wool insulation. I remember thinking I would probably live if I fell down. To the right of the door, there was a few wooden planks nailed together. I picked it up and put it over the first gap before walking to the middle. Then I picked it up again to walk to the door on the other side. As you probably guessed, that door led to the other tower. When I opened it up, the room was yellow, old and deteriorated. I honestly didn't feel safe about stepping foot into the room because I was worried about whether or not the floor would collapse. But across that small room was a ladder leading up and a window that the light outlined the door was coming through. My dad shouted out for me to come back. I had spent so long getting across that the 5 minutes were almost up. I turned back and rushed across with the planks, and I rang the bells with my dad before going back to class. I was remembering this when I thought to myself, why not go and see what was up that ladder? So I went up, and after pushing some metal around, I managed to crouch down into that square door. When I turned on my phone's flashlight, I looked around me to see where the planks were. They were not near the door. I looked up and down the sides of the attic I was standing on and didn't see them. Flashing my light over to the other side, I managed to find them. They were placed so that you could move from the middle to the other tower. In my head, I was still contemplating this when the room became darker for just a second. A shadow had washed over the light that was coming from the door as I heard the sound of creaking wood. It took me a second, but I realized what that meant. Someone was in the room and had walked across, blocking the window. Rushing back to the balcony, I decided to wait for my 30 minutes to end by staring at the bottom of that staircase, hoping that some old janitor would eventually walk down. They didn't. Instead, nobody came down. The timer on my phone went off, and working as fast as I could, I wire brushed the metal legs till they shined. During that time, I convinced myself that whoever was in that room was probably a janitor and was just as curious as me as to what was up there. So after I calmed down a bit, I went back up and called out to see if someone would respond. I heard nothing. As I stepped into that square door, my feet immediately stepped onto something. The planks were back on this side. I would have sworn to you that nobody could have possibly come down without me hearing or noticing. My curiosity was higher than ever, so I picked up the planks and made my way across. When I opened the door, I saw that the old yellow floor I remembered had caved in. No ladder existed. Whatever room it led to had gone with the floor. Looking down, it simply went into the top of some square, white ceiling tiles at the bottom. I stared stupidly into the void and thought, whatever did block the light was in the room, and walked across the window. They walked across the door on this side. Just as I realized, I heard the door slam on the other side, and the sound of rushing feet on old wood. The sound became slowly quieter as I stood still. A few minutes passed before I managed to breathe again. I don't know who was up there or why they didn't say anything when I was visible the entire time. When I looked around more in the attic on the way out, I was expecting to find a pile of cans, or trash, or something to indicate it was squatter, but the room was empty. The only thing not bolted down was the planks to cross. Attempting to not make it obvious I had been in the attic, I brought up if anything big needed to be repaired while I was gone at college. Eventually, with enough steering, my mom mentioned that the other tower had collapsed on itself during the short while I was at college. Luckily enough, it was only the wooden floors that had rotted through, and the walls were solid enough that they just tossed it all away and put up a new ceiling in the deacon's quarters where the debris had fallen into. I don't want to bring this up with my family, because I know they would think I was drinking again, but whoever or whatever that was can't just be allowed to stay up there. Plus, odds are during the 2 times I was in that attic, they know what I look like. I don't want to have to worry about some psycho following me from church one day, so they don't get ratted out. If you have any ideas, let me know. I'm open to anything. Story 9. The night I met Gil still haunts me. I've since left Rhode Island, and I never want to see the ocean again. That night in October haunts my dreams and my waking hours alike. I can't keep it to myself anymore. It gnaws at me to be the only one who knows what happened. Well, not the only one. Gil knows, of course. I moved into a rented duplex outside of Little Compton, Rhode Island last year to take a job teaching high school English. Little Compton is a speck of a New England town near the Massachusetts border. Idyllic, quaint, and walking distance from the ocean. The move wasn't exactly a step forward in my career, but it was a pleasant shock from my time in Boston. I'm a Tennessee girl originally, yet coming to this sleepy little seaside town felt like being reunited with an old friend, somehow forgotten. How I wish they could have stayed forgotten. I met Gilbert at a local pub called Neptune's, where I sometimes played trivia with a couple teacher friends. I saw him sitting alone down the bar from me, so alien and tall and awkward on his bar stool, and strangely beautiful all at once. There was something unmistakably odd but wholly captivating about him, and when he looked up and caught me staring, his eyes were like an aquamarine arrow right through me. I don't think I've ever felt that way looking at another human being. It was then as if some unknown force had lifted me off my chair and carried me across the room to speak to him. Something so out of my character that it's still confounding to me now. We meshed like 2 well-machined gears, and we talked and laughed and drank some more. He was gentle and soft-spoken and slyly funny, and although he was built like a great slender swimmer, there was also something fragile about him, like the bone of a bird. We stayed until the bar closed, and when we stepped out into the foggy by early October, my head was spinning. I hadn't even considered how I was going to get home, and when he prodded me about it, I said it was just down the way. "So it's close?" he asked, and I said it was, although it wasn't true. He nodded and said he was in the other direction, and that's when I blurted out a thought that hadn't had the chance to face the scrutiny of my own good sense. "What if I went home with you?" Gil looked a little surprised, and then peered up the road to where it fell away into a black cloak of trees just beyond the amber throw of the street lamps. Although he was turned away from me, I could see the edge of his face crease with discomfort or worry. I backpedaled immediately, stammering and flushing red, but then he turned to me with a warm smile that stopped my words and said, "All right." We walked through the night on an empty road that curved beneath old maples with their orange fingered leaves hidden by mist and dark, and our way was flanked by arteries of low unmortared walls built from stones plucked long ago from surrounding fields. We barely spoke. I could smell the sea. The last drink I had kicked in, and I felt myself weaving a little at his side. After about 15 minutes, we turned onto a narrow, rutted drive that winded deeper into the gnarled trees, and we followed that for several minutes until the ghost of an aging 2-story colonial stood pale and luminous in the moonlight. Gil led me up paint-peeling steps and into the house. He flipped on the lights and revealed a kitchen that was somehow both organized and incredibly cluttered. All about were relics of boats and of sea life and of the sea itself. Shells and sea glass in jars, a mummified pufferfish on a wooden stand. The walls were adorned with nautical objects, block and tackle rope, fishing net, instruments I couldn't identify, and numerous framed images of boats and fish and seabirds. The house was warm, hot, really humid, and the air smelled briny, not unpleasant, but as if one were standing right on the shore. He led me through the kitchen and into a living room that was outfitted much the same, and I gawked at the sheer density of the strange old fishing decor and mismatched antique furniture. Wow, I've never seen anything like this, I said. Gil gave a sheepish smile and rubbed his upper arms. It's a bit of a mess. I wasn't expecting anybody. I collect old things like this and, well, maybe I'm due for an intervention or something. I laughed with him. Then I noticed a little framed picture of a bearded fisherman on a lobster boat, lanky and tall with weathered smile lines around familiar piercing eyes. That's, my father. He moved close to me, and his proximity reignited a flutter in my stomach as we looked at the photograph together. Honestly, a good part of this is his fault. He loved the ocean more than anything, and I'd say it loved him back, so much that it eventually kept him. He rubbed a hand over his neck. In a storm, when I was 14. Oh, shit, I'm sorry. A silence fell over the room, and I suddenly found myself sweltering in my pea coat. I shrugged it off, and he took it from me and folded it carefully over the back of an armchair. I felt dizzy from the booze and the heat. Is it hot in here? Yeah, sorry about that. The thermostat, something's wrong with it. I gotta get somebody to come look at it. I took a deep breath to steady myself. Please, take a seat, he said. Can I get you anything? Some water would be great. Thanks. I eased onto a sofa that groaned under me as he hurried off into the kitchen. For a moment, there was only the ticking of an ancient brass clock on the crowded mantel, and my breath suddenly felt loud in the room. I wiped sweat off my brow and sniffed the wet underarms of my blouse. Something thumped quietly under the floorboards. I leaned over to look. The floor was dark wood, almost black, and worn to a polish by perhaps a century of foot traffic. I listened for a long moment, but the sound didn't come again, and then Gil was bustling back into the room with a sweating glass of ice water. I drank it, and the relief of its coolness flooded through my veins and restored me. He sat on the edge of the couch beside me and smiled, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He seemed abruptly out of things to say, and so was I. The moment lingered, and for the first time, I felt a twinge of panic behind my drunkenness. What the fuck am I doing here? I don't even know this guy's last name. I don't even know. He reached over and took my hand gently, and that disarming smile broadened with unmistakable kindness. The nagging fear vanished, and I was giddy all over again. You okay? He asked, and then we were all over each other. Clothes fell like autumn leaves, and then the wood of the antique sofa was moaning and chirping to a pounding beat. There had been 2 prior intimate partners in my life, but I suddenly found myself wondering what the hell we'd been doing all those times. This was like fireworks, and after we reached a wailing, hammering finish, we lay there panting and spent. Damn, you don't fuck like a school teacher. What's that supposed to mean? What's a school teacher supposed to fuck like? I don't know. I'm just surprised as all. Goes to show you about making assumptions. I giggled and looked up at him. There were several thin red lines on either side of his throat, very faint, like scratch marks from fingernails, but uniform and chevron-shaped. What's this? I asked. He put a self-conscious hand to his throat. Nothing. A birthmark. Hereditary thing on my mom's side of the family. Oh. I traced the hair around his navel with a finger. I don't want this to sound weird or intense or whatever, but I've never met anyone quite like you before, he said. How do you mean? It's hard to put to words. You just seem really great is all. I've never met anyone quite like you either. So we're even. I was too much a little punk to think much of teachers when I was in school, but this has really turned a corner for me. That grin again. 20 minutes later, we were back at it in the sweltering dark of his bedroom, twisting and moaning in the bed sheets and sweat. Afterwards, we lay together for a short while. Then Gil took a sleeping pill, and then we slept. I awoke with a start some time later. It was pitch black, and I was drenched. I felt feverish, parched. The air hung hot and oppressive. I sat up in the bed, naked, disoriented, my head already beginning to pound with an angry hangover. I peered through the darkness at Gil's dim form next to me. He snored softly. Gil! I whispered. I nudged him. He didn't wake. I nudged him harder, but he stayed fast asleep. I rose from the bed and almost fell. The room seemed like it was orbiting around me. I was a little nauseous. I slowly felt my way out of the room and deeper into the house. It was unbearably hot now, and that briny scent only made it worse. I banged my shin on something and cursed softly, moving on through the dark until I made it to the kitchen. I found the light switch and turned it on, blinding myself. I swayed in the doorway for a moment, then moved to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. I gulped it down, then filled another and gulped that down too. For a moment I just stood there, squinting against a harsh light. Then I reached over the sink and unlatched the window. I hesitated, debating. Then I swung the window wide, and a merciful rush of night air, frigid with the season, washed over my bare skin. Thump. I turned with a start to a door at the opposite end of the kitchen, perhaps a pantry. My heartbeat shifted up a gear as I stared in silence, but no other sound came. I took a few steps toward the door, holding my breath, then stopped and listened. The house was completely quiet. Somewhere far beyond the open window, a dog barked. I took a deep breath and left the kitchen. I found the living room light switch and turned it on. I crossed to a large bay window and pried the stiff, tarnished latches open and swung the windows wide on their hinges. Cold flowed in like water through a broken dam. As I turned from the window, I noticed the thermostat control on the wall. I moved close, and to my surprise, the dial was turned all the way up to 90 degrees. I puzzled for a moment, wondering how much of a line I was crossing in someone else's home. Then I lowered the dial to 70 degrees. I turned out the lights in the house and felt my way back into the darkened bedroom, where I settled into the clammy sheets and laid my aching head on the pillow. I awoke soon after to a sound coming from deeper in the house, a sort of flopping, whumping noise, then the patter of water. I blinked in confusion, noticing immediately how much cooler the house was now. Cold, in fact. I turned to Gil's sleeping form and shook him. The sound came again, almost like a sheet of wet leather slapping against the floor. Gil, wake up. I shook him harder. He shifted in his sleep and drew in a deep breath through his nose, but he still didn't wake. Gil, God damn it, wake up. I shook him again, but it was no use. The house had gone quiet. I got out of bed and navigated unsteadily to the door. I peered into the leering darkness beyond, suddenly very afraid. I looked back at the dark shape of Gil in the bed, then again at the void before me. Perhaps it was the wind blowing through the kitchen window, blowing the curtains. Maybe they knocked something over. I took a deep breath and inched my way deeper into the house. I switched on the living room light. I looked around, but all was as it was before. The bay window stood open as I had left it. An icy chill seized me, and my skin prickled up in goose flesh. I moved to the window and shut it. As I turned and approached the gloom of the kitchen doorway, a faint gurgling sound stopped me. My heart hammered dull in my ears as I stood peering at the vague dark shapes of the counter, of pots and pans and things hung on the walls. The sound didn't come again, so I moved carefully forward, the ancient floorboards grumbling under my bare feet. I reached around the doorframe to the light switch, and the kitchen bloomed to life. At first, I saw nothing unordinary, but as I stepped into space, I found myself standing in a large puddle. I looked down and was shocked to see several fish heads strewn about the wet floor. I stared at them, dumbfounded, then traced a haphazard trail of them with my eyes to the door on the far side of the kitchen. It was now standing open, a square of deep black in the wall. My pulse was racing, but some terrible curiosity drew me slowly across the puddled floor to that cavernous door, and when I looked in, it was not a pantry, but a rough-hewn stairwell that descended into a basement. Water droplets pinged somewhere down there like cave drippings. The air that wafted up from the pit was cold and stale, and reeking of salt water and fish. I crouched, trying to get an eye line on whatever was down there, and when I couldn't, I crouched even lower. The basement was flooded, totally filled with water that shimmered blackly in the faint moon glow of a window well on the far side. I could see now that the rickety stairs before me descended almost immediately into the water. Unknown things floated in that pool, and old pieces of furniture protruded from it in little islands of swollen wood and rotted upholstery. Something splashed faintly down there, and I snapped upright and backed away from the door. Then a gurgling sound came from behind me, crackling with damp and closeness. I whirled around, and my eyes fell on a creature, a nightmare creature. It was coiled up against the door we had entered the house through like a huge serpent, partly hidden by a standing butcher's block. The dark Ichthian skin of its bulbous length shimmered with the strangeness of scales. My heart stopped in my chest as the thing shifted over itself, peering at me with lidless black eyes, and I saw that its upper half was humanoid in shape. Lanky arms with webbed fingers sprouted out of a torso that bore leathery hanging breasts, and beneath a stringy cascade of dark wet hair, a face slotted with flat nostrils suddenly split in a fat-lipped maw, and a fish head fell out and plopped onto the tile. I began to scream. The thing writhed at the sound, fins flopping like seal flippers. Crimson gills flared on the sides of its squat neck. Then it shot forward across the floor at me, webbed hands slapping and long fishtails swiping behind it. I surged backwards out of the kitchen and crashed into a cabinet in the living room. I was knocked off my feet by the impact, and the whole thing came down beside me in an explosion of china. The thing scrabbled towards me and grabbed my ankle with a clammy, suctioning grip. Between my own screams, I was dully aware of Gil's hoarse voice in the next room, and suddenly he was braced naked in the doorway and hollering at the creature. Mother, no. He grabbed my arm and tore me from the creature's grip with great strength. He hauled me stumbling from the room, and immediately I could hear the thing that he called Mother gasping and slapping after us. We piled into the dark of his bedroom, and he tried to fling the door shut, but the creature wedged itself in it, and I could hear what snapped as it fought the door back open. No, Mother, no. Leave her be. But the thing he called Mother did not stop. She clawed across the floor towards me, silhouetted only by a thin light from the living room. Gil grabbed at her, but she fought him off and pursued me still, gasping and sucking wetly through her flaring gills. I threw myself at where I knew the room had a window, blinded by darkness that swam with my tears. I tried to open the window, but could not undo the latch, and as the sound of flapping fins closed in, my hands found a chair back. I lifted it on instinct alone and swung it hard. The window shattered, and broken glass sang on the floor around me, but I could tell that the wooden crossbars had not broken out. I went to swing again, but was ripped right off my feet by fish-cold hands. I fought on my back, shrieking, as the thing squirmed over top of me, slippery like cold sex and shockingly heavy. Its mouth yawned wide in my face, the flesh at the corners unfolding like a barracuda, and there were glints of light on needle teeth. Then Gil slammed into her side. Throwing her off of me, they rolled together and thudded against the bed, and the thing he called Mother hissed like some viper, and her tail lashed about the room, breaking things in the dark. I was up in a split second and sprinting across the house, not noticing when my feet were sliced by broken china, and somehow staying upright as I skittered and slid on the wet kitchen floor. I could hear the sucking gas of the creature already slithering close behind, and as I fumbled open the deadbolt on the door and flung it wide to the night, I could hear Gil wailing in despair. I charged out into darkness, crazed and directionless. I threw a single glance back at the house and saw Gil looking out the window at me, his face drawn with an anguish I could feel in my chest. Heartbreak, and then I was looking ahead as I ran. Branches slashed at my bare skin, and my bleeding feet pounded wet leaves and then gravel and finally pavement as I broke onto the main road. I ran in the deep shadows of the reaching trees that sheltered the roadway in that place, and did not slow for maybe a full mile. When I finally did, it was to get my bearings, and once I had them, I walked quickly onward in the center of the road, my breath searing in my throat and the taste of metal on my tongue. I walked for perhaps 40 minutes, and did not pass a single soul in that time. I reached my duplex in a trance, as the sky to the east grew a pale gray with the approaching dawn. The windows about were all dark, and there was nobody out to see me wild and unclothed like some primitive being. I stumbled numbly to my door. I pried up a stone from the weed-choked garden with shaking hands and grabbed up the key that lay beneath it. The door unlocked with a click that sounded like a gunshot to my ears, and then I was inside and sealed away from the horrors of the world. I called the police on my landline at sunrise, and the timing of my call saw fit to put me in contact with the chief directly. He seemed stupefied by my words initially, then angry, and somehow it made me feel angry with myself for saying them. "Gil is a good man," he repeated many times throughout. He asked if I had been drinking or if I had taken any drugs. I told him the truth. He asked if I had any psychiatric conditions, and I said I did not. He asked if I understood the seriousness of lying to a police officer about such things as I described. And it wasn't long before I hung up the phone on him and cried on the floor of my kitchen. I called out sick the next day and did not leave my place. I barely ate. That evening, a teacher friend from school stopped by to give me a paper bag that contained the things I had left behind at Gil's house. My clothes, my purse, my phone. Gil had brought them by the school for me. When I opened the bag, I was struck once more by that briny scent, and I dropped it. Some time has passed, and I've since moved home to Tennessee. But the events of that night are so fresh in my mind that they could have happened only hours ago. I never saw Gil again. I know what happened to me that night in October, and yet I still routinely find myself questioning my own sanity. I ask myself sometimes if I'm losing my mind. Perhaps this is just what losing your mind is. Knowing something is real when everyone else knows it is not. But this was real. It happened. I'm haunted by every detail of the experience. But the image that somehow lives most clearly in my mind, as if I'm actually looking at it whenever I think of it, is the image of Gil peering out the window at me as I ran. The devastation in his face. The crushing sadness. His face will stay with me for a very long time. I don't know if writing these words will give me any peace or if anything truly can, but at least now I've told it as it happened. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. Story 10. I saw a deer somewhere. I just don't know where. Like a lot of people, I drive to get from my job to my home and back. I tend to see cars, trees, birds, the usual, the occasional deer. Even so, I never really thought anything was wrong, but that was until I get home. I just walk up the stairs to my room. I realize I saw a deer. A memory flashes into my head of seeing just a lone deer alongside a road, just grazing on some grass, but it feels like I just saw. I guess I saw it on my way home today. The memory seems weird though, just popping up now. The next day I drive to work and keep an eye out for deer. If there was one yesterday, there may be more today. The area around my home tends to get a lot of deer coming through the more the year goes on. My mom always seems to see some each day despite the fact I only see some like once every 2 weeks. I get in and get ready in the back to start cooking like normal. A couple hours and I get the same sensation again that I just saw a deer, unlike yesterday, where I chalked it up to me just remembering it because the stairway carpet is somewhat the same color of a deer's fur when the stairway gets dark. I am currently cutting tomatoes and nothing of that color is in sight. I look up through the order window, or whatever people call it, to see if a deer was in the parking lot in the windows across the lobby, but I saw nothing. The memory was of a deer in a field this time, which makes no sense. Unlike yesterday, the deer is not grazing, but appears to be looking off to the side. Dwelling on it really made it hard to focus, and I got a couple orders wrong. I left at around 8, since it was one of my shorter days, and went home. I did not get any more memories, but I did see a trio of deer in our backyard. It ain't like a field, but it ain't small either. Plenty of space. The deer fled as I pulled up the driveway. When I parked, there were none left. As I fell asleep, I had a dream. Nothing crazy and surprisingly not deer related, I think. It was just me walking through a field into a house similar to mine and staring at a bed. Not much else, and definitely not the weirdest yet. I woke up the next day and got ready, but as I got in my car, I noticed that there was a deer in the yard, just standing there by itself, and surprisingly did not flee as I turned on my car. I backed up and left not thinking much of it besides that it might be an unfortunate deer with that wasting disease if it did not run. Today felt different though, especially since I kept seeing a bunch more lonesome deer walking around. I guess this must be what my mother is like some days, just constantly seeing deer. I even thought one got hit, because I drove past one in the middle of the road, just standing there when a car passed me going the other way. Looking back, I saw the car did not swerve, but the deer was now alongside the road, thankfully appearing unharmed. As I got to work, I asked my boss if they had seen all the deer that had been wandering around, but surprisingly, they have not. I guess my luck must be like my mother's if I am seeing all these deer now. Annoyingly though, it is distracting to see deer walking in the parking lot, especially since I am working the register today. Leaving for home, there's another deer, this time standing next to my car. As I approach, it bolts running across the road and nearly getting hit by a car that does not brake or honk. Really did not care about hitting that deer, I guess. I get home and decide to go lay down since my head feels like it is swimming. At some point I must have passed out, because I awoke to find it dark and it looked like something was standing next to my bed. I turn on my phone's flashlight, see the face of a deer staring at me in bed. I call for my mom, but she either is still not home or is sound asleep. I try and look away from the deer, but I still see it. It's in front of me still. I turn my head again. Still there. I try and get up, but I feel it ram its head into my gut, sending me back onto my bed. I blink and it get closer. I close my eyes and open them, hoping it's a bad dream, but as I open my eyes, all I see is that deer in my face, unblinking. And all I feel is my chest as the hooves press down more like a crack in my rib cage as it begins to jump up and down. And my head throbs in pain like never before. If this is a nightmare, I know now that I will never wake up because I no longer see anything but a deer. I think nothing but about this deer, and I feel nothing but the pain in my chest as a deer is sitting on my heart.